the untold stories of the pharaohs of Egypt, behind the thrones of immortality. To the world, they were gods on earth, immaculate figures cast in gold, rulers of the Nile, builders of eternal tombs. But behind the statues and hieroglyphs, behind the meticulously preserved bodies in royal tombs, the pharaohs of Egypt were also men and women of ambition, contradiction, and destiny. Their lives were more than just reigns, they were dramas filled with power struggles, mystical visions, betrayal, obsession, and divine burden. The tale of Egypt's pharaohs spans over 3 millennia, from the formation of the first unified kingdom around 3100 BCE to the death of Cleopatra VII in 30 BCE. Yet many of their most compelling, human stories remain shrouded in silence, overshadowed by myth or edited by time. Let us walk beneath the surface of grandeur, into the corridors of palace whispers and divine anxieties, and uncover the untold stories of Egypt's pharaohs. 1. Nama, the shadow unifier. At the very dawn of pharaonic Egypt stood Nama, also identified as Mens, the figure credited with the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt around 3100 BCE. His famous Nama palette shows him smiting enemies and wearing the double crown of a united kingdom. But the real untold story lies in the violence and vision of that moment. Egypt was not simply unified, it was conquered. Nama may have ruled through fear and fire, enforcing order on a fractured land. His rule introduced not just kingship, but the ideology of divine violence, the pharaoh as the smiter of chaos, as the earthly arm of Ma'at, cosmic balance. What were the costs of unification? How many rival clans were erased? How many names lost? The silence of archaeology is filled with graves that whisper of the cost of that first crown. 2. Dosa and the architect who challenged the gods. Pharaoh Dosa, circa 2670 BCE, is remembered as the first king of the Third Dynasty and the one who commissioned Imhotep, his brilliant vizier, to build the step pyramid of Saqqara, the first monumental stone building in human history. Yet behind that architectural marvel lies the untold tale of a visionary mind, Imhotep, who rose from commoner status to deified sage. Dosa's deep reliance on Imhotep shows a pharaoh who trusted intellect more than inheritance. Their bond may have been one of deep spiritual partnership. Imhotep wasn't just an engineer, he was a priest, healer, astronomer, and keeper of secrets. This was perhaps the first time an Egyptian king outsourced eternity, not to priests, but to genius. 3. Hatshepsut, the pharaoh who rewrote gender and power. She wore the false beard of kingship, sat on the throne of her stepson, and rewrote her own history. Hatshepsut, circa 1479 to 1458 BCE, one of the few female pharaohs, ruled as king, not queen. The untold story is not just her reign. It's how she survived the politics of being a woman in a male-dominated priesthood, military, and court. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri still whispers of her achievements, grand trade expeditions to Punt, vast temple-building projects, and domestic peace. But after her death, her name was chiseled out of monuments, her memory systematically erased. Why? Was it Thutmose III's revenge? Or a priestly judgment on her sacrilege of wearing the crown? Perhaps it was Egypt itself trying to forget that a woman had ruled better than most men. Akhenaten, the pharaoh who abandoned the gods. Perhaps no pharaoh is as enigmatic or divisive as Akhenaten, r. 1353 to 1336 BCE. He discarded the age-old pantheon of Egyptian gods in favor of Aten, the sun disk, and moved the capital to a barren desert he named Akhenaten, modern Amarna. The untold story here is one of spiritual obsession and isolation. Akhenaten didn't just change religion. He isolated himself from tradition, priests, and possibly his people. His art shows elongated faces, drooping bellies, strange features. Some believe it reflects a genetic disorder, others a metaphysical reinterpretation of humanity. He may have suffered from epilepsy, fueling religious visions. Or he may have simply been a philosophical radical, using power to stage the first experiment in monotheism. But after his death, Egypt erased him, he became the heretic king, buried without honor. 5. Tutankhamun, the boy king in the crosshairs of empire. Much has been said about the treasure of Tutankhamun, but little about the fragile politics he inherited. taking the throne at 9, likely manipulated by powerful generals and priests. Tutankhamun was a puppet in the restoration of the old gods after Akhenaten's revolution. His untold story is one of vulnerability. His skeletal remains show signs of deformity, possibly from inbreeding. He died at 18, and the manner of his death remains a mystery. An infection, a chariot accident, or possibly assassination. His golden tomb, untouched for millennia, may have been hastily prepared. Was it because of political turmoil at court? Or was his burial rushed to cover up an inconvenient truth? 6. Ramses II, builder, propagandist, and mythmaker. Known as Ramses the Great, his 66-year reign, 1279 to 1213 BCE, was one of monumental temples, colossal statues, and the Battle of Kadesh, immortalized as a grand victory, though it was likely a draw. What's untold is how Ramses curated his image, inventing a narrative of divine kingship that outlived reality. He erected temples that eclipsed predecessors, inserted his name over older kings' inscriptions, and commissioned poems that praised him like a god. Ramses II gave Egypt a visual and psychological empire, even as its military edge began to dull. 7. Cleopatra VII, the philosopher queen in a dying world. The last pharaoh was not just a seductress, as Roman propaganda painted her, but a polyglot intellectual, strategist, and philosopher. Cleopatra spoke Egyptian, something many of her Ptolemaic ancestors did not. She engaged with Greek, Egyptian, and Roman ideologies, and tried to preserve Egypt's sovereignty through political alliances, first with Julius Caesar, then with Mark Antony. The untold part of her story is not how she died, but how she fought to live. Her court was one of revival. She revitalized temples, reasserted royal ceremony, and funded scientific inquiry. When she died by suicide in 30 BCE, Egypt did not just lose a queen. It lost its 2,700-year monarchy. Beyond the stone, pharaohs as flesh and spirit. We remember the pharaohs through limestone and gold. But behind the colossal statues were flesh and blood people, visionaries and tyrants, heretics and humanists, mothers and sons. They dreamt of eternal life, feared rebellion, courted the gods, and sometimes challenged them. Their true stories are not only told in pyramids and tombs, but in the erased names, the abandoned cities, the recarved cartouches, and the whispered prayers of peasants who saw their kings in the stars, but also in their taxes and battles.